Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through yet another offseason together. As always, you can find our around-the-clock, 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground Jacksonville Jaguars coverage each and every day on social media such as Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. And you can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. So in today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast, we're going to talk about the AFC South and why I believe there is a path for the Jaguars to compete for the crown, the divisional lead. Really, to me, how I see the division, judging by it seems like the consensus, viewpoints and power rankings, etc. out there, it really seems like a lot of people are putting the Jaguars as the third team in the division right now. Houston Texans, clearly number one. And pretty much I'm struggling to find any power ranking that doesn't have the Jaguars behind the Indianapolis Colts at number two. They are pretty much universally in front of the Tennessee Titans, but I truly believe that this very well could be a scenario where they go from worst team in the NFL the year before, not necessarily worst, like they were in 2021 and then 2022. They go from worst to first. But they were clearly one of the worst teams in the NFL last year. They were, like a weird, nonsensical, irrelevant win against the Tennessee Titans late in the year with Mac Jones at quarterback away from picking, number two, number one, etc. So, I don't dispute the fact that the Jaguars were a really bad team last year, that the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans are both clearly better. But when you look at the Jaguars' divisional games, they went 3-3 in the division. They beat the Titans twice, and they beat the Indianapolis Colts at home. It was their first win of the season. Trevor Lawrence had really a career day. It was the, slogging of Gus Bradley, really. If you give one thing to the old Jaguars regime and old Jaguars staff, they knew how to take Gus Bradley's defense to the woodshed, and they did exactly that in that game. But when looking at the Jaguars' three losses in the AFC South, 2 to Houston Texans in week 4, 2 to Houston Texans later in the year, in what would end up being Trevor Lawrence's last game of the season, and then, of course, 2 to the Indianapolis Colts in overtime in the season finale. The Jaguars only had, those 3 losses in the AFC South only, losing half your divisional games, only 3 losses. But the 3 games that they lost were all very close one-score games. Yeah, the Texans swept them, but not in convincing fashion. Jaguars should have won that week 4 game. I remember being there in Houston, and the general sense from the Jaguars locker room and coaching staff after the game in the coming days was, wow, we really screwed that one up. And, had a few things gone different that way, had Trevor Lawrence, not missed a couple of deep throws, Jaguars probably win that game. But overall, the Jaguars fought close in the AFC South last year, despite their terrible, dismal record and overall on-field performance. So coming into this year, I do think the Jaguars have improved in a couple aspects. I think, obviously, adding Travis Hunter is pretty significant. I expect them to have a better offensive line. The secondary can't really get worse, and at the very least, they added one of the NFL's better nickel corners and Jordan Lewis to it, and Travis Hunter part-time. And I'd contend that Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, and De'Ami Brown is better than the top 3 receiver unit of, Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, and Gabe Davis from last year. So I do think the Jaguars have gotten better in terms of the roster. And then you look at the coaching staff, and a lot of it's unproven. Like, I'm not even going to necessarily say the defensive coaching staff is a marketed and definite improvement because we haven't seen it yet. But I do think from a scheme perspective, from an offensive play caller perspective, I do think the Jaguars improved a lot. And there's a lot more to being a head coach, obviously, than calling plays and scheming and, getting a good script, etc., that kind of stuff. But I do think at the end of the day, simply if you're looking at that role, the Jaguars have improved, heading into next year with the hire of Liam Cohen. Now, looking at the rest of the teams at AFC South, to me, it wouldn't be a surprise if the AFC South winner was really the 7th, 6th at best, maybe even 8th best team in the AFC next year. Kansas City Chiefs, Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals, Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Chargers. You see my thumb? Yeah. That's 6. I could see the AFC South, best AFC South team, being 7th best team in the AFC. That's just where things are with the AFC South. The Jaguars normally, have a relatively easy strength of schedule because they play 6 games from the AFC South each year. It's just what it is for the division right now. And looking at it team by team, I think Houston Texans will always have a shot because CJ Stroud, but there's some unknown there in terms of, the offense coordinator comes really well regarded, but like with Liam Cohen, it's not a projection. We've seen him as an offense coordinator in the NFL. Spectacular. We haven't seen their offense coordinator yet really calling his own plays, putting together his own scheme. Offensive line, still a question mark, in my opinion. They added a couple receivers, Christian Kirk, Higgins, and Noel in the draft. I think the common comp for Noel really was Christian Kirk, so that was an interesting addition, to me. I think, obviously, they're a solid team. They're a playoff-worthy team. But they're definitely a flawed team and a flawed roster. And to me, they aren't like – it isn't like they're looking up at the Baltimore Ravens or the Buffalo Bills where, hey, you might have to win 12 or 13 games to win this division. I think a 9-8 season could really realistically win it. Tennessee Titans, I think, it's going to be a tough year. I think Brian Callahan has to show a lot. Obviously, they have a rookie quarterback. I like their offensive line. I still like Calvin Ridley. The rest of their weapons, I'm not so sure about, and we'll see how they do on defense. Obviously, I think the Indianapolis Colts, they've added some big names this offseason, at cornerback, at safety, obviously with, Bynum. And then the draft, they went and got, Tyler Warren, a lot of people's number 1 tight end. I didn't get the impression, talking to people at the combine and throughout the draft process, that he was like a unanimous consensus number 1 tight end. That's obviously obvious because he was the 2nd tight end off the board. But he's not like a transcendent tight end who's going to completely, add a new dynamic to the Colts offense. It's a solid tight end prospect, but he's not rare. So looking at all these teams, there's no team that's perfect. The Colts have the worst quarterback situation in the division between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, where even the winner of the battle, might be Antonio Pierce's situation last year after the Raiders preseason preseason game. I don't know the exact quote, but he was asked something to the effect of the quarterback competition. He was more or less like, yeah, wish it went better. And that's just what I kind of think, expect from the Colts. So I'm not really big on Anthony Richardson. Not big on Daniel Jones. I think the Colts could be in for a long season. Frankly, if I had to power rank the teams in the AFC South, I'd probably put the Colts 4th and the Titans 3rd. I think the Jaguars, they have to prove stuff after last year. So I think they're putting them in the 2nd, might be a leap to some people, but I think it's fair. And until they get past the Houston Texans, which was a struggle for Doug Peterson's group, I think the Texans are still the clear number 1 team in the AFC South. But they are not a team, to me, that is completely unbeatable. They're not a team that, they just have the longest of long odds to, take over the AFC South. They're a quality team. They're a very flawed team. So I'm interested to see how the AFC South plays out this year. I do think the Jags improved. I think the Texans more or less stayed the same. Titans obviously improved just by moving on from Will Levis, probably one of the worst starting quarterbacks that we're going to see for a while. And then the Colts, to me, yeah, they probably improved, but they're bad enough at quarterback to where I don't think it makes a difference. So that is how I see the AFC South landscape right now post-draft. I think, as long as Trevor Lawrence stays healthy, I think he's going to produce in Liam Cohen's offense. And it's really up to the Jaguars defense to, be the deciding factor to me in their pursuit of the AFC South crown. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Don't forget to find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.